Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 57, Atheism, Science, and Culture, with our in-studio guest, Maria Vorontsova. Hey Maria, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hi.
So for our audience, could you introduce yourself and talk about a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So my name's Maria Vorontsova. I'm a botanist or a plant scientist, trying to figure out different species of grasses. I don't really have anything I think of as being spiritual practice, and I was brought up in the Soviet Union. So when I grew up, there wasn't really anything religious happening whatsoever, at least until I was 11 years old. And in my family, still nothing. Yeah. So I guess I consider myself as somebody who belongs to the scientific community, and we don't talk about anything spiritual normally, just lots of plants, really.
So what was it like growing up in the Soviet Union, and, you know, were there other people that were religious, or was it mostly people who, like, was it just not talked about?
Growing up, well, I guess it was just normal. At school, we were taught to be proud of where we were and who we were, and we were told that we're in the most amazing country in the world. And sure, you know, we were 5 years old. Everybody believed that we were in the most amazing country in the world,
right?
And so all the communist paraphernalia and propaganda and stuff that was happening, but it was just like a background to life. Nobody really thought about it very seriously. It was just what was. Religious stuff, there wasn't any. I think I remember that when I first started school, they just, like, part of the history teaching was how other countries are capitalist and have a horrible history of exploitation, and how the Soviet Union was supposed to be advanced further ahead because of no longer exploiting people en masse. And the way they taught it, that the part of the old exploitation infrastructure by the capitalist society is religion. So, like, the religious belief was supposed to be deliberately set up to keep people in line so they're compliant and don't complain when they're exploited. And I guess it didn't really occur to me to question that. Like, the implication was that Soviet Russia is advanced, so we don't have religion. And, like, well, maybe in other parts of the world they still have it. Well, that's a bit strange. When the Soviet Union fell apart in the 90s, and some of it, like, suddenly there was a big switch where apparently being religious became fashionable. So suddenly people, it was a really, really big thing from not having been there at all. And people who didn't, you know, like, often that people who found something for the first time are really, really, really more enthusiastic about it than people who'd been doing it for a long time. It was strange. I wasn't living in Russia permanently at the time, but...
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, you know, you find a lot of people, when they find something new, it's kind of like, woohoo, look at me,
yeah.
I'm in this thing and it's awesome.
Well, I enjoy finding new things. That's totally understandable.
Absolutely. So was it weird coming from Russia, where religion was kind of like, whatever, to England, where, you know, you had the Church of England and other people with different religious attitudes and beliefs?
Yes, I didn't understand the distinction straight away because, like, I was brought over from Russia when I was 11 years old, so we just went to school and nothing particularly religious happened in school either, so it was possible to just, that whole area of life just didn't exist in Russia or in England. So I only really got to understand how fundamental the differences were when I had friends who were seriously religious, and I spoke to them about it, and I, you know, grew up a bit and saw the media and stuff. And when I was first in the UK and we had, like, school assembly with hymns, yeah, it was just like the trimmings of life, you know, what color is the door handle? Apparently you stand up and sing this thing. I didn't really think about what it was. Or
what do you think of the surge of the Russian Orthodox Church? Like, because it seems like once Russia split into the various different things that it split into, the US, you know,
yeah,
then it just seemed like there was an upsurge of, like, for me, I noticed more of, like, the Russian Orthodox Church, and that seems to be coming into prominence now.
I suppose, if I was entirely honest, I feel sort of uncomfortable about it. And part of that reason is political, because they're closely affiliated to Putin and the current government in Russia. And I think they're sort of the churches used by the government a little bit to promote the government. And there's a sort of a fallacy, like a nationalistic feeling across Russia that Russia is great and pure and has good traditions, and so the Russian Orthodox Church kind of can be seen as the old way, like the good old way of life.
Right.
And I think sometimes people can seek comfort in it because it's the good old way of life without necessarily anything about it that's relevant to its content or current day relevance. And Russian Orthodox Church itself, it's pretty prescriptive.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like when I compare it even to the Catholic Church, like the Roman Catholic Church, it's like hugely different. But then again, the Catholic Church these days has the Pope Francis, and he's way more liberal than most popes ever before him. So, it kind of, but even before then, it's a really stark contrast when I was learning about the Russian Orthodox Church, that it was just like so much more prescriptive. Like it was like the older Roman Catholic Church. And it seems like it was kind of somewhat stuck in time, even though it was kind of oppressed for a long time.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't want to say something like cultures move forward at different rates and a lot of things that happen in Russia just happen later. That seems like a bit of a patronizing viewpoint. But in some ways, I think it was where other churches were maybe 50 years ago. I had a friend, also a Russian friend, who was a really serious Russian Orthodox person. And I guess the parts of it that I saw is that she was living with her boyfriend, but it was always a problem because the wasn't approved by the church. Or her life was going in ways that she wasn't sure would be acceptable to the church, and it was really painful and difficult for her. And so it was like a process of seeking approval for what she knew she wanted, and sometimes she'd get approval and sometimes she didn't. And it's just like this seemed like this maybe not entirely necessary extra layer of approval that needed to be gotten from somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I can definitely see it's comforting. I think in modern Russia, like the only time I've directly come across the Russian Orthodox Church is it's basically funerals. And then everybody suddenly, I don't know, instinctively remembers what it was to be religious, even though they were never religious in the first place. So you'll often see lots of atheist Russians standing around kind of quietly because you're supposed to be subdued and you're supposed to be quiet. And nothing's really come to replace the standard sort of religious funeral service. Yeah, I've been to a few grandparental funerals recently, and it can be quite a strange experience.
Yeah, I bet, because it's interesting to see what cultures remember to do, especially when they've had so much change. What older practices are remembered and brought back after a big major change. And I think it's fascinating to watch because cultures evolve and grow, and they do neat things. And
yeah, I think Russian Orthodoxy, it did survive. Like there were enough people that were alive to keep it going intact as a tradition all throughout the Soviet Union. It just wasn't very overt. So there were some things about religion when I was very small, but mainly like in the shop we would see old ladies whose heads were covered and old ladies taking flowers to church, graveyards, and you would see people going. So it wasn't like forbidden completely to run churches, but mainly it was, like older people that you didn't really know anything about and you thought they were a bit superstitious.
Right. Do you see other people from other countries who are Russian Orthodox and say like the US or the UK, like coming back to Russia to practice? Is that a thing?
People do come back to Russia for various reasons, but I don't think there are usually religious reasons. Maybe I just don't know the right people. I can't really say.
Well, I figured it'd be interesting to know if that is the case, but
I think there's definitely Russian Orthodox churches in exile, and also there's several generations.
Right.
Because people left Russia for persecution at different stages in the historic process. So say in London, there's at least 3 different things that are slightly different kinds of Russian Orthodox Church. There's something called Starovertsi, which is the old believers, and they're ones, I think that they refused to update when the church moved the calendar to be in sync with new science, and that was in the, was it 1600s?
Right.
Yeah, so they're a bit like legendary in Russian culture.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That must be fascinating. I mean, granted, I'm a theology nerd, so old practices for different traditions really interest me. So I figured it would be really fascinating to go and watch and participate. But that's because I'm a nerd about these kind of things. Now, speaking of religion in other countries, you do a lot of field work in Africa.
Yeah,
and we were having a conversation the other day about you being an atheist in Africa and how you really can't talk about it much. Can you talk about a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I guess the people that I work with in Africa is just assume that everybody's a Christian. People are many different kinds of Christians, and that can be a really big deal, and that can lead to very heated arguments, but it doesn't seriously occur to people that somebody would not be a Christian. So, and it's something that people think about and talk about a lot, maybe a lot more openly than in British society. So I've had a couple of occasions where my knee-jerk reaction in the conversation is just to be honest. So I will usually say, oh, well, I don't believe in God. And you will get the funny look and the pause. And after a while, like it seems that basically if you don't have religion, it means that you have no moral compass or moral values whatsoever. You're just out to get what you can out of life and rip everybody off. That's what the implication is of not having religion. Yeah, so that's not a very comfortable place to be.
Yeah, and what the thing is that that's really not true. I mean, I've always believed that your will and moral compass, your morals and stuff, isn't necessarily tied to your religion, but they can inform. Like if you do practice a religion, it can inform you. But it's not. Religion's not a prerequisite to being a good person.
That's nice. That's a nice way to think about it. I think because in many parts of Africa, there's just people have never personally met anybody who said they didn't believe in God. It's just not I don't know. I guess people must have doubts in private.
Is it mostly Christianity practiced in the places that you go to, or is there also tribal religions as well?
It very much depends. I really like Tanzania because in many parts of Tanzania there's a very healthy kind of long-term mix between Islamic communities and Christian communities, and frequently in the same family. Some people will be, many families will be historically Islamic, but there'll be an opportunity for kids to get a free education by going to a Christian school. So those kids would end up converting. And that doesn't do anything about the family structure to communities. It's just quite heterogeneous often in one place. In Madagascar, there's still a lot of, local religious practice that wasn't affected by more and more people converting to Christianity. I don't have very direct experience of that because I normally work with people who are scientists in the capital city, and they'll take me to rural areas. And so my local collaborators themselves will not be familiar with the direct rural tradition. And usually they'll try to explain to me that it's, primitive, or they don't do it like that anymore, or there's somebody I was working with who belonged to a Catholic organization in Madagascar, and they seem to have a thing. They went around educating different groups, with religious practices that hadn't been converted to Christianity, not necessarily with a view to converting, but with a view to active discourse between Catholicism, I guess, and the native religions.
Interesting.
There's a lot going. Like the diversity is incredible, actually. Yeah,
and then you've got also all the missionaries and NGOs and all that stuff working all throughout Africa.
Yeah.
And, setting up schools and doing medical care and all that. So.
And many of them do completely amazing work, like especially medical work and environmental protection and things that you just can't get money for in the charity sector. Well, maybe the Catholic Church will pay for it. Wow. It's good.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the sad thing these days, right? Governments aren't really willing to put up the money.
Yeah.
To do that kind of work. But, hey, the Catholic Church has plenty of money, or, a particular denomination has money, or an Islamic school has money, and they'll usually pony up.
That's very admirable, actually. So at least there's some agency that smaller organizations can take to do things themselves without having to be tied to like governments and large charities.
Right. Yeah, I usually like to follow like Doctors Without Borders and those kind of groups too.
Oh, they're amazing. Yeah.
They're I mean, they just do this amazing stuff, and it's always amazing. Especially like I was recently listening to a NPR article about Ebola, and like the last of the Ebola patients is going home finally.
Yeah.
And you know, they had the person on from Doctors Without Borders, and just the amount of work they put in to help eradicate that again.
That's an incredible organization. Yeah. Totally awesome.
Absolutely. So kind of switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about, you know, the folks like Richard Dawkins and because, you know, they they get a lot of flack for being very misogynistic. And I was curious to wonder what you think of that type of more, I don't really say militant. I kind of want to say fundamentalist atheism.
I must admit, I find it a little bit appealing because it does seem to be that in people who belong to religious groups get advantages automatically going with that, like nice communities and somewhere to go to on Sunday and, I don't know, extra food here and there, moral support. It's very nice. Yeah. And then if you don't believe in anything, apparently you don't get the community or the moral support, and you're not any less in need of the moral support. So things like this, I think it's called the Humanist Society in Britain. They try to even that out a little bit and to create a place maybe for atheist people where they can have something resembling what members of the religious community actually take for granted as provision for their day-to-day life.
Right.
It's easy to fall into things like Dawkins' arguments. I guess I've been lucky in that I know enough people who are serious about religion and understand how it interacts with society better than I do. So I was warned off it before I ever really even read it. So I'm not into Dawkins and I can't really explain why. It's just something that I'd always understood to be not very nice and not very understanding. And actually, I'd like to be somebody who can have at least some understanding for ways of life that are different from mine, or at least respect it, even if I can't understand it.
I mean, I think it's much more interesting that way, you know? Like
yeah, all this cool stuff.
Yeah, especially like, and even with the people that I disagree with, you know, and you know, and I get a lot of flack from certain areas of religion, and it's like, well, you know, you have an interesting point of view, but I don't particularly agree with it. But hey, you know, I've learned something new. I've learned something about your tradition that I didn't know before, you know?
Yeah, one thing that a friend of mine does in the UK a lot is interfaith dialogue groups, like really serious, long-term, proper religion and it's amazingly interesting. I guess atheists don't get invited, so I wouldn't normally hear about it.
But see, I think that's a shame. and you know, and this is the reason why I've tried to have atheists on the program, on the podcast, is because, you know, while it's not a belief in God, it is a belief system. And it's not like,
I guess it must be, yeah.
It's not like organized like the Roman Catholic Church or my tradition or, you know, our covenant or anything. Yeah. But it is a belief system. It's not, you know, it's like when I talk to my mom's just a very devout agnostic. Yeah. You know, but she's agnostic. She, you know, she doesn't pretend that she's trying to choose between religions or anything. She's just agnostic.
Yeah. That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, atheism kind of is the same way. It is a system of belief. It's just not, it doesn't have a church and it's not organized in that way.
There's been a big movement in British society against Islamophobia, which has been really good. Basically to prevent people being viewed negatively just because they appear to have associations via their religion to some kind of terrorist activity, which is completely stupid.
Yeah, I agree.
And one of the side effects is there's now like some people talk about religious community as something that would include all of Christians and all of Muslims, and you end up with a kind of we're people with a conscience because we have religion, and that's how we're going to build a group which will include Christians and Muslims. And I don't want there to be Islamophobia, but also it's strange to end up as a group that's defined by, I don't know, not having belief in something like I'm on one side and all religious things are on the opposite side somewhere. That's strange.
Yeah. I mean, I I have a problem with that too, actually, because, you know, a lot of these groups tend to focus on the big three. So it'd be like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And actually, I applied to a thing at Cambridge that was supposed to be an interfaith thing, but it was only Christianity, Judaism, and
and how is it the big
Islam.
three anyway? What about everybody in China and India?
Right? Like, what about Taoism? What about Shinto? What about paganism, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, I applied and I got a very polite no.
Oh, no.
From them.
That's a shame.
I mean, that's okay. I was okay with that. They're trying to do a specific thing with the holy books and things like that. So, but my problem with that idea, though, like that interfaith dialogue is only between those religions, is that you are excluding so many people that are of mixed faith, like me, or of no faith, you know?
Yeah.
And there's no dialogue there. It's only dialogue between this little group.
Do you think it's actually useful for things having interfaith dialogue?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
I'm not saying it isn't. I've never been in an interfaith dialogue, so I'm coming from a very clueless standpoint.
Well, you know, the way I see it is that interfaith dialogue, and if you have people in the room talking about spiritual things and moral things, you know, you're able to see people when you have these discussions. And it's harder to say us and them if you're talking to a physical person in front of you.
Yeah, that really helps, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. So like the Islamophobia thing, that's great. You know, I'm glad they're working in it. And it sounds like they're doing something similar, like having people talk to each other. Yeah. But if you're not talking, the way I believe it is that if you're not talking to everybody, you're missing out.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's like political parties, right? If they feel like, oh no, if we're going to let everybody in, they'll just be just like the two big political parties and then everybody else, and we'll be in a crowded room. Yeah. So they just want more attention for the ones they care about.
But it's really funny. I think, you know, the more inclusive you are, the more you can, you empower people to actually do things.
Well, I can relate to that from a standpoint of a biological system, because there's many kinds of biology where it's been definitively shown that diversity is good, and it's not just diversity is good. Diversity ensures stability of systems, and diversity is necessary to give resilience for ecological systems in the long term. And I'm not quite ready to make the analogy directly to religion, but it does seem like diversity in religion might have serious positive effects.
Well, and I maybe extrapolating that a little further, like accepting the diversity of our human systems, that we can be diverse and yet together in a system, and then accepting those, you know, and it would make our society stronger.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
I don't kind of get it why that doesn't happen automatically anyway. Like, you know, in Tanzania, lots of different religions, they live in the same place. Doesn't seem to be any problems. Why can't we do that? I think actually the majority of the UK does that exactly. You only hear about problems and you don't hear when everything's all right.
That's true. I mean, it's the same in the US, you know, it's mostly you hear like, oh, bad Muslims, oh my God. Or I'm Christian and we should all be Christian and this should be a Christian country. And, you know, and the US is just not.
But the media needs to sell those newspapers and website clicks, right? So it's got to sound a bit crazy. Yeah,
I think so. And, you know, and we seem to get it in our head that there has to be one way for everybody. And, you know, when I've talked to you and when I talked to Sarah, you know, her hearing about the UK, it's just like, well, they kind of figured it out somewhat. I mean, they still got their issues, but, you know, they've kind of figured it out. What the hell is wrong with us? You know, why are we so behind?
Yeah, it's this fundamental human thing of forming groups of what you think is like-minded humans. And there's nothing wrong with forming groups, but you automatically seem to have something that's not the same between you and the other groups, and there's tension.
Right.
It's difficult to know how to not do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, you know, and then I'm thinking back to my biology days too, you know, like, I think it's easier for us to pick apart the minutia of things. Like, you know, we have our own little group of labels here and our own little group of labels here. And, you know, and we can study it that way. And it's, you know, we can get down to the nitty gritty and put more labels on things and do more separation of groups. And then we don't see the big picture anymore.
Yeah. Actually, that happens in science all the time. That's quite normal. Yeah, you always find yourself zooming in to like minute aspects of something. And when you really, really concentrate on exactly what is the nerve structure in this tiny bit of grass, then you forget what your job meaning actually is because you're too focused on the nerves.
And then, you know, there's the, you know, how does that little tiny bit of grass like work in the whole entire field and what is its place?
Yeah, that's harder.
Yeah, but those are the really hard questions even for humanity, you know, like, what is my place and what is your place, even if we have different belief systems? You know, how do we interact with each other? How do our ideas come together?
I think the problem is that people seem to think of it as resource allocation, like either I have the spiritual moral ground or you have the spiritual moral ground. Both of us can't have the spiritual moral ground. And I don't see why both of us can't. I mean, why not? Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm kind of weird that way because, you know, I think, you know, we can all have spiritual moral ground together, even if we don't have belief in a God. You know, I don't see why it couldn't work. And, you know, I know very perfectly nice, wonderful people that are very good people who are atheists. I know very horrible people who are very fundamentally religious.
I think sometimes I think that without changing what I actually think, I could consider myself as believing in God because some people that I've spoken to, their definition of what it means to believe in God and what God is effectively kind of the same thing that I would call just observing the universe. Like, I haven't chosen to redefine it that way, but I think there are people that, I guess you just define things and how you happen to be comfortable thinking about them.
Yeah, and I think for pretty much all of the atheists I've talked to, it's kind of that same idea. Yeah. You know, where they observe the universe. Like one of the atheist pagans, like the way she works with deity, when people say that she's aspecting deity for them or something, is more like, you know, she's speaking a truth that is part of that particular deity's worldview. Yeah. And she doesn't think of it as, you know, she's speaking for the deity, but she's finding a truth in that mythos of that spirit. And that works for her. Yeah. You know, finding those truths in the mythos.
That's nice. Yeah. I guess people seem to get a lot of very important things out of religion that I don't get out of anywhere. Or maybe I do get it out of emotional experiences in other ways. I'm not really sure whether it's true that religious people get more out of it.
Well, I mean, maybe you get it out of the science too. Because for me, you know, being a former biochemist that I am, you know, a lot of what spirituality means to me, I found through DNA.
Oh, right? Yeah?
So,
explain.
Well, because, you know, we know how DNA works. We can manipulate DNA. Yeah. But we haven't figured out exactly why it came to be that way. Yeah. And I think in those bits of I don't know is where spirit lies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because, you know, how do we explain that? We still haven't been able to figure out how even the protein molecules came to be on this planet, really.
And the more science figures out, the more we'll just realize there's more and more gaps. It's not like it's ever going to finish the figuring out.
Right. Like, I mean, there's more and more particles of atoms in the nucleus of atoms that we keep finding and there's more and more. I mean, where does it end, right? Yeah. Or, you know, and there's that old adage, like, at the end of pi, you'll find God.
Really? Okay, yeah. I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, that's an old one that I heard a long time ago. But, you know, it's things like that. You know, there's that mystery there. Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily defined by whether you believe in God or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can kind of see that.
Because, I mean, obviously there's something about grasses that really draws you in like that.
The salary.
That's good. I mean, you do need scientists need to eat.
Indeed.
But I mean, there is something that drew you to the work that you do, right?
Well, I just think plants are really pretty and I like looking at them. So I want to understand how they work and why they all look so different. That's sort of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But like I said, there's a mystery in that, like, because you don't know.
Yeah, lots of mystery.
Yeah,
like they're amazing.
Oh, plants
you
are.
Just look at them and think, wow.
Plants are hardcore, man. Because they're just so different from human cells.
Yeah.
And from animal cells. That it's pretty hardcore. They do a lot of things that are just like, wow.
And when you add it all together into a tree, wow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, like seeing how like energy works and all that, but we could probably nerd out about that a lot because
sorry, that's somewhat off topic, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's the whole like almost minoring in botany that lets me nerd out on that.
I'd be very happy to have a long conversation about that.
Awesome.
Oh, can I ask you a question then?
Sure.
What do you think relationship is between things that look like superstition and actual religion? Like one thing that I have a clear memory of when I was small in Russia, like no religion anywhere, and none of my friends ever said they believed in God. But there was plenty of stuff like, if you're thinking about something bad, then knock on wood, or if the cat has run in front of the if the cat has crossed the road in front of you, you must spit 3 times over your left shoulder. Mm-hmm. And then there would be like bad omens. And that stuff was everywhere, like with all the kids. Mm-hmm. So apparently there's no need to have religion to have that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Because, there's some of that kind of stuff that we consider magic in witchcraft.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a difference between the spiritual devotional aspect of being a witch.
Yeah.
And the actual craft of being a witch.
Okay.
So, there's techniques and things for good luck and for charms and spells and things that don't necessarily require a belief in deity to actually work and do things. So, for me, that kind of stuff falls into that category.
The craft things.
Yeah, where it's like, it's things to move energy around to have a better outcome.
But you speak as somebody who feels in control of the process and thinks about how it might work.
Right.
And what I observed is just lots of people who were scared about bad outcomes. So there were like things that you're supposed to do to prevent it.
Well, I guess...
Is it the same?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Because it's you taking control of the energy of the outcome, right?
Okay.
So like if you threw salt over your shoulder to protect you from whatever, bad luck. Yeah. Or, you took care of them. Like, I know there's stuff like around mirrors. Like if you break a mirror, you can take the pieces and... Yeah, that kind of stuff. And, to me, that's a magical act. So you're manipulating the energy around you to bring in good things.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, like you deliberately made an effort to improve the situation.
Right.
Which is an input of energy into it.
Or, to make somebody else's life not so good, like if, and there's a lot of the thought behind it. Yeah. Even if you're doing some sort of act, like making a little charm or whatever, or, or putting food at the crossroads to.
That's a nice way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Another thing that I don't really understand, which seems to happen in Africa a lot, is there's a widespread fear of witchcraft. Like if things go wrong or, I don't know, there's a traffic accident, people often assume that something by somebody will have been done deliberately for that outcome.
Yeah, that's kind of, there's a lot of that in Africa. From what I understand, there's a lot of anti-witch stuff. And it depends on where you are, too. Yeah. And it's actually not really limited to Africa because, there's a lot of that kind of crops in different, in other traditions, even in the Western world. But yeah, it's a big problem, especially for women, because it's a lot like old European times where, it was really directed towards women.
Oh, that doesn't sound good. Yeah.
Yeah, especially old women.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I can understand why it's common, I suppose. I don't know a whole lot about it. And, there are many more people that know more about that kind of stuff than I do. But, it's been a huge problem in recent years.
Really?
With modernization. because, you know, with people like going on the internet and finding that, because like I've seen lots of communications with pagans in other parts of the world, like Islamic parts of the world or different parts of Africa, and they usually fear for their lives.
Oh,
like
really?
they're just not public.
Oh.
They try to be very anonymous on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if everybody around you is very frightened of like your craft even existing in the first place, that's not a safe place to be at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's kind of in the same, like, not, it's the more extreme end of the category with you and your atheism, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, people are kind of like wary, like, well, do you have morals because you don't believe?
Yeah.
And, you know, the anti-witchcraft stuff is like, you must not have morals because you believe in something satanic, which is actually not true. But it's not really satanic, but, you know, it's kind of on the extreme end of that, I think.
Or maybe even not anything to do with morals, just having power to alter outcomes.
Yeah.
Like that, I mean, that can be pretty frightening.
Yeah, and yet people pray.
Yeah.
And still do, like, superstitious stuff.
Yeah, good point.
And
it doesn't make sense, does it?
Well, because I guess, you know, for me, I've always considered that kind of stuff part of the magic craft, like prayer and, you know, superstitions and things like that. Yeah. That's all part of that to me. I mean, other people see it much differently than I do, obviously. But, you know, it's like prayer is the same thing. You know, you're sending your prayer out to the universe, to Jesus specifically, to manipulate an outcome for whoever you're praying for or for yourself.
So are you saying like instances when suddenly a cat has crossed the road in front of you is actually an instance where maybe you need to apply energy to your life situation one way or the other? Something like that?
I would think of it that way, personally. I don't know how, you know, some other people might think of it in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, it might be the universe acting against them.
Okay.
But, you know, being the witch that I am, I think, well, I need to be aware of something going on. That's how I usually see it.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think the maybe one of the bad influences when I was small was I have an aunt who is, I think she's a Christian, but at the same time as being a Christian, she would see like meanings in literally every single seemingly random event that happened. So like the superstition component to me seemed to be much bigger than any kind of religion component. And so when I was young, she just seemed so just combination of irrational and difficult to talk to. So I guess I gave it a bad press.
Yeah, which can, you know, if somebody is really kind of into that and is freaking out about it, that would make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, she was reading everything to do with it all the time. And
I've seen that happen with some other people, and it's just kind of like, really, no, it's okay. Relax, it's all right. We'll help you out.
It can be quite frightening, I think, when you really get to think about it properly. And like,
well, if you're seeing, if you're seeing bad omens and everything, I think even Neil Gaiman wrote about that in American Gods. His American Gods book. You know, if you're seeing bad things and everything, then everything's bad. You know.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time. If people wanted to ask you questions about either atheism or grasses or
atheism and grass is brilliant. I'm there.
Awesome. What's the best way to contact you?
I guess email. I just have my normal work email.
Okay. We could put that in the show notes.
Brilliant.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. It was very interesting. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Maria for joining us on this episode. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can subscribe to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, or follow us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast. You can also financially support this podcast through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.